What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today I am going to be doing my full review on The Last of Us Part 2, so strap in because this might end up being a very long one. Now, I'm going to preface this video by saying that The Last of Us Part 1 is a top 3 all-time game for me. I played it not long after it launched, probably at least 6 years ago now, probably 7 since it was pretty close to the launch. And so I've been waiting for the sequel for all these years now. And because of that, I obviously had a lot of heavy expectations leading into the game, so I just wanted to make that clear. In some areas I'm probably going to be pretty biased towards the game. In other areas I'll probably be overly critical for the same reasons, so I just thought I'd make that known, and just keep in mind that this is my own review, so this is all just my own opinion. This goes without saying, but this is filled with spoilers, so if you haven't played the game, then definitely click off the video and come back when you have finished it. Now, I'm going to break this review down into two parts. The first part focusing on the more objective stuff, such as the gameplay, the world building, the graphics, the sound design, and all that kind of stuff. And then towards the end of the video, I'll focus more on the story side of things, as I do have a lot to say about the story. So, starting off with the gameplay, and all in all it did feel a lot like the first game, but I mean that in a good way. The looting mechanics were very similar, the crafting mechanics were very similar, and in my opinion neither of those things needed changing at all, so I was glad to see that they went down the same path as the first game without trying to make any major improvements. As weird as it might sound, for me personally, one of the things that makes this game feel so realistic is the fact that you do always have to be on the lookout for supplies, and that just going from A to B means you'll miss a lot of the necessary supplies needed to craft your bandages and molotovs and stuff like that. A lot of people might not really like that about the game, making it feel as though it is a little bit slow and making it drag on, since you sort of have to check every corner of every room if you do want to stock up. However, for me, it just makes me feel a lot more immersed in the story, as being in a post-apocalyptic world, I'd imagine nothing would come easy and that you would have to work very hard to get everything you need to survive. One change that I instantly loved was, at least for Ellie, the removal of the shivs. I know they were in the first game to make it a little bit harder and to make it so that you did have to watch your resources, and for everything else I loved it, but for the shivs I just really didn't think that was necessary in the first game. Again, it is a gameplay mechanic, I get that, but a pair of scissors isn't going to snap in half when you stab someone with it, so I was extremely happy to see those go in part 2. With that being said, obviously Abby has to craft shivs, so they weren't completely gone, but I did like that both characters weren't identical and that they each had their own strengths, so it didn't really end up bothering me too much overall. Now, crafting and looting aside, the actual gameplay itself was such a crazy step up from the first game, which I guess is to be expected. It is a 7-year gap, so obviously a lot of stuff has changed technology wise, but man, the improvements from part 1 to part 2 was actually a lot more than I ever expected. Firstly, I thought the gunplay was such a vast improvement on the first game. It wasn't so much that it was bad in the first game, but it wasn't great either. However, in this game, it really was done so much better, and I actually enjoyed getting in gunfights in part 2 much more than I thought I would. In part 1, I almost always went stealth mode, as I didn't really feel that safe using weapons since the controls were just a tad clunky, and so I didn't really want to leave it to chance as to whether I could hit my shots or not. However, in this game, there were so many occasions where I actually opted to pull out Ellie's bow or use the silenced pistol and land a quick and easy headshot. I still played stealthily as often as I could, and mostly that meant getting stealth kills up close and personal, but I just felt as though there was a whole other area to the game in part 2 that really didn't feel too viable in the first one, at least for me personally. Landing a headshot with the bow in this game is incredibly satisfying, and if you can string together 3, 4, 5 stealth kills at range and get through that whole area in half the time that you would if you went around stabbing your enemies, it just feels so much better overall, and honestly the gameplay alone was worth coming back for, whether you enjoyed the story or not. Now, in relation to getting a few ranged kills, the one thing that I absolutely loved in this game was the way that the AI reacted when they knew they were under attack, or when they first started to piece together what was going on. Sometimes you'd kill someone with the bow while they were in a conversation with another enemy, and when they don't reply for a few seconds, the other enemy actually starts getting curious and even asks them if they're okay or what's going on, which I just thought felt so realistic. If they stumbled across their friend who was dead, they even all had their own unique names, and they'd literally yell out something like, "Oh shit, someone got Jim," alerting the rest of their friends, at which point they'd obviously all be on high alert. Now, the alert mechanic has been in video games for probably 10 years now, but I've never really seen it this in depth, where each AI literally really has their own name, where the other AI actually seem to care about each other and show sadness when their friend's been killed. It just added even more to the realism and really showed that the world building for this game was absolutely off the charts. Every area of the map that you go to felt lived in, felt realistic. Essentially, it just felt exactly what I'd imagine this world to be like in that situation, and even more than that, it just felt like everything had been put there for a reason. Often in single player games, you'll come across super unrealistic situations where there's clearly a hole in the wall for you to go through, yet there's no valid reason why that hole would be in the wall in the first place. In this game though, nothing ever really felt like it just happened to be there for the sake of the story or the sequence. Sure, every now and then there would be a few of those tight gaps you can squeeze through in some odd place and stuff like that, but I'd say 95% of the time, everything just felt like it was realistic and not out of place, which again just adds even more to the realism, which for me is probably one of my favourite parts of the game. Now, touching even more on the level design, the actual look and feel of each location was honestly some of the best level design I've ever seen in a video game. Some of those areas in Seattle where there's just massive overgrown areas full of empty cars on a highway, or abandoned military stations or quarantine gates, again, it all just felt so lived in, and you could honestly look at each place and just make your own little theories about what happened here, why the army must have run off and abandoned it so quickly, what it must have been like to be in that traffic jam on the highway and having to get out to run to safety. It was all just done so well and nothing felt like it was there for no reason. Now, speaking of the overgrown areas, one of my favourite additions to the game was actually the prone mechanic in combination with the ability to hide in the grass. Now, this is by no means groundbreaking mechanics for a video game. This has been done for years in some of the Assassin's Creed games in terms of the hiding in grass. And obviously, proning isn't anything special either, but since it is a new addition to this franchise, it just worked so well, and again, without trying to sound like a broken record, it just felt very realistic. In real life, if there was some super long grass and I saw some enemies coming my way, you can bet your ass I would be hiding in that grass and crawling around hoping like hell they didn't see me, so having the ability to do that in this game just worked perfectly. Another awesome addition that somewhat ties in with the whole hiding aspect was the addition of the sniffer dogs, as this really just added a whole other dynamic to the game where you kind of had to change your plan of attack if you end up coming across dogs, getting you out of your comfort zone, which was really great for adding that fear factor back to the game. If you know you can sneak around easily throughout the whole game, then things tend not to really be scary at all. However, if you realise, oh shit, there's a dog over there that's going to sniff me out and alert the whole group of enemies, then that fear factor and intensity comes running right back, and straight away you're on the edge of your seat wondering how the hell you're going to get past this area. The same thing goes for the new Stalker variants of Infected. These guys really threw off my playstyle and made the game a hell of a lot scarier, as the listen mode was useless against them, and something about knowing that the enemy knows where you are, but you don't know where they are, that shit gets me on the edge of my seat every single time. As for the new Shamblers, not so much a fan of those guys. They really just felt like a budget bloater that were honestly some of the easiest to kill in the game since they're so slow. But I do appreciate that they didn't just want to have the same old enemies, so brownie points for trying with those guys, even though I think the game would have been just as good without them. Now, the last gameplay mechanic I wanted to touch on before moving on to the story is the addition of the dodge. This was arguably one of the best additions to the entire game in my opinion. Such a simple change added so much depth to the hand-to-hand combat and turned something that was relatively clunky in the first game into something that actually required you to think and do the right moves at the right times, and honestly the game wouldn't have been the same without it. There were a few boss fights that actually leaned on this pretty heavily because having hand-to-hand combat in close quarters needed something other than just pressing the attack button. And so, like I said, I think this was one of the best additions to the game overall, even though it was very simple and it made for some very awesome boss fights that weren't necessarily hard, but they definitely required a bit more thought than the first game. The gameplay was honestly a solid 9, maybe 9.5 out of 10. The first game was almost all story and no gameplay for me in terms of what I liked about it, but in this game the gameplay was just such a step up, and it's definitely up there with some of the better gameplay that I've gotten my hands on in a video game. So now that the gameplay elements are out of the way, we're going to dive into the story side of things, and I just want to remind you that the story is completely subjective as to whether or not you like it. There is almost no objectivity when it comes to whether a story is good or bad, so whether you liked or disliked the story, just keep that in mind, and also try to remember that disliking a story doesn't make it a bad story, because I have seen so much of that online over the past few weeks. For me, the story side of things was really a tale of two halves, so I'll touch on the first half now and then get stuck into the second half after that. Personally, the first half of this game may be some of the best, most interesting storytelling that I've ever played or even seen in television or film in my entire life. Straight off the bat, we get so many moving parts to the story that we obviously have a lot of questions questions about why is Ellie mad at Joel? Do people know she's immune? Does she know that Joel lied to her? What's the dynamic between Jesse, Dina and Ellie? Who the hell is this Abigail? There are just so many questions that we have early on, and although some people seem to not really like that aspect, it had me absolutely hooked, and I was just so excited to play through the game and piece together what the hell was going on. As soon as we got to play as Abby at the start, I knew something weird was going on, but I just wasn't sure what it was. Honestly, I thought maybe she was Ellie's sister or something like that. I had no idea, but very early on we got the idea that she might have been one of the bad guys when we see the scene of her and Owen planning on capturing a few people from Jackson, yet at the time we didn't really know who they were after. Now, before I talk any more about Abby, I have to talk about the elephant in the room, as this is all I've seen all over the internet for quite a while now. Yes, Abby is buff as shit. She could crack my head open with her bicep while downing a can of spinach in the other hand. I get it, it is pretty weird to see a girl being so massively built. With that being said, if you do think Abby is a shit character simply because she's jacked, then you, sir, have got some very serious insecurities if you can't handle the fact that she's stronger than you. She's a fucking video game character, lower your guard, mate. The jokes and shit are funny, I'm all for the banter side of it. I'm absolutely not some SJW that's defending buff chicks or something. All I'm saying is that if you write a character off straight away because they look different, then you, sir, are an absolute pleb. I've also seen so many people saying, how could she get so big in an apocalyptic world? It makes no sense, yet there's meatballs walking around all over the place, but no one blinks an eye because they're men. In this kind of world, even the likes of Ellie, who's clearly a twig in comparison, would be absolutely strong as fuck, considering every single thing that they do every day requires so much strength and perseverance. It quite literally is survival of the fittest, so I don't find it weird at all that she's so strong, and it's very clearly explained throughout the story why she's like that. She lost everything she knew and she wanted to be useful to an organisation such as the WLF, so she hit the gym. Simple stuff as far as I'm concerned. Now, you're probably thinking, oh, this dude's an Abby simp for sticking up for her and defending her, but in actual fact, I don't even like Abby, to be honest. She's a fairly bland 6 out of 10 character for me personally, so despite defending her looks, I barely even like her, but I'll touch on that a little bit more when we get into this second half. So anyway, getting back to the story elements, obviously very early on, Abby ends up killing Joel, which I think is a big reason why a lot of people don't like this game very much at all. Joel is arguably the main character and he died around 2 hours into the sequel, so obviously that angered a lot of people, and I guess that's fair enough. I don't think anyone wanted Joel to die, and I know I personally was pretty mad too, but I was more mad at Abby rather than just shitting the bed and saying the game sucked. Joel's death instantly had me hooked and made me feel pretty much as though I was actually Ellie, as she obviously goes on a revenge run, partly to save Tommy but partly because she wants to get revenge, and that was exactly how I felt as well. I pretty much wanted to brutally murder Abby since she killed one of my favourite characters of all time in, quite frankly, a very savage way. So we see Ellie and Dina go off to look for Tommy, who'd already gone after Abby and her crew, and from here until the halfway point of the game I honestly loved every single minute of it. The flashback scenes of Joel and Ellie spending time together just built on their relationship even more and painted an even better picture of why she was so hell-bent on getting revenge. He really did become a father figure to her if he wasn't already, and even though they clearly had some sort of rift when he died, she quickly got over that and just wanted him back. The way that they answered some of those questions much later in the game was so well done in my opinion. I kept asking myself why Ellie and Joel had issues right before he died, and then we get the flashback of where she figures out that he lied to her about the Fireflies, and like I said, it just answers those questions in such a good way, intertwining all of those moments rather than just telling the story from start to finish, which I really liked. Eventually, Ellie tracks down and kills more and more of the group, and it comes to the part where she kills Mel and Owen, at which point we finally see that Tommy is in fact safe and everything seems to be fine, but then bang, Jesse dies and we end on a cliffhanger, at which point we switch to playing as Abby, which pretty much brings me to the second half of my thoughts on the story. Now, like I said, I don't really love Abby and I don't really dislike her either. I think she's just kind of meh, and overall she's a pretty decent character that I just personally don't connect with that much at all. When we switched to playing as her again, I kind of thought, oh okay, we'll get like 60 to 90 minutes of backstory on her, maybe explain why she wanted to kill Joel and stuff like that, and I was really keen for that. I thought it was cool to play as the villain and see what happened behind closed doors. Well, 2 hours into my playtime as Abby, I was thinking, alright, I guess it's maybe just 1 or 2 missions and then we'll probably switch back to Ellie, so let's just power through this and then get back to the main story. 2 hours later, I was still thinking the exact same thing, and I was only just over halfway through my time as Abby. Judging by the recordings I have, from the first recording as Abby to the final recording as Abby, there was 8 hours of playtime as her. 8 hours. That's almost as much playtime as the entire first game, which clocked in at I think about 10 to 12 hours. 8 hours of playing a character who, quite frankly, I just don't really give a shit about whatsoever. Now, to make it clear, I don't think she's a bad character at all. There is a lot of depth there and we learn so much about her and her motives, and overall I think the story was fairly solid, even though I personally wasn't a fan of hers. So I just thought I'd make that clear. Me saying I don't really care for her doesn't make the game bad. What does really affect the game for me though is the pacing of the whole second act. 8 hours of playing as a character that, like I said, I just don't really give a shit about. It really kind of killed the vibe for me, honestly, and at least in terms of the story, I was just not that invested anymore. The only thing that I was thinking the entire time as Abby was that I wanted to finish this part and get back to playing as Ellie, the character that I waited 7 years to play as. Now, I've spoken to a lot of people so far about the game and their thoughts on it, and there seems to be a recurring theme in regards to this part of the game. Those who played The Last of Us Part 1 around the time that it launched weren't really a fan of the second half, whereas most of the people that I know who only played Part 1 maybe 1, 2, even 3 years ago, they weren't as fazed by the second half, and in fact they really enjoyed it. My little theory is that having less time being attached to Ellie and Joel might have made those people a lot more open-minded, which is a good thing for sure, whereas most of us who waited longer, maybe 5, 6, 7 years, are just way too attached to Ellie and Joel that we don't care as much for Abby for that exact reason. Because we spent so long waiting to play as those characters again, only to play as Joel for maybe 10 minutes, and then halfway through the game we switched to a character that killed him for at least 8 hours. Keep in mind too that the average playtime for this game is 27 hours, and I somehow, even though I feel like I played pretty thoroughly and stealthily, finished it in around 20 hours. So my 8 hours with Abby is more than likely 10 to 12 hours for others who took 25 plus hours to finish the game. For me, this whole second half was easily the biggest issue, and to be honest, really the only issue that I had with the game. Like I said, the first half was next to perfect for me. I wouldn't change a thing about it. However, the second half just felt like such a drop off after that, which pretty much hugely affected my thoughts on the game overall. It wasn't at all about playing Abby either, because I was actually really interested in getting her backstory, but for me it was purely the pacing of it and the fact that we literally start the game over again as Abby, with no upgrades, having to do the entire 3 days all over again, and that is where the issue lies for me personally. Now, I know the reason that they did that was because the point of the story is to show you that the revenge never ends well and there's no reason to hate people, rather you should just let it go and move on, and to do that we had to feel empathetic to Abby in order to not hold that resentment ourselves. I get that. The point of the entire game was essentially to show that there are always two sides to every story, and that as much as you might hate someone, maybe they didn't do anything wrong and deep down they're actually a good person. Technically speaking, Abby didn't really do anything wrong. Joel killed her father in, let's be completely honest, an unnecessary, pointless act, so she got revenge on him, but then she even let Tommy and Ellie go, so really she didn't do anything wrong. Yes, killing someone is wrong, but in this world, getting revenge is somewhat normal, so in my opinion, she wasn't really in the wrong at all. Through Ellie's eyes though, Abby is the absolute devil and she must get her revenge for killing Joel, who was like a father to Ellie, and so like I said, the point of the story is to show that that's just not the best way to look at things. Well, even though I get that, I personally just didn't really give a shit. I wanted Abby to die from the moment she killed Joel to the moment Ellie lets her go at the end. Even the entire time I was playing as her and hearing her backstory, seeing her be a great person to Lev and saving him, I just didn't care. I just wanted Ellie to kill her at the end regardless. Maybe I'm a twisted fuck for feeling that way, I have no idea, but 8 hours of getting backstory on a character compared to 7 long years of knowing Joel and Ellie, it just does not compare for me, and so no matter how hard they tried to make us empathise with Abby, it just did not land for me personally. Once again though, that doesn't mean the game is shit just because I don't like a character. I've seen so many reviews slamming the game because of the exact same thing that I'm saying, but honestly, despite the big rant that I just had, I love that they tried to do something different and didn't just give us the same old boring revenge story with a happy ending, even though it didn't really stick the landing for me. Aside from the pacing and the fact that I just don't care for Abby, 3 of my favourite moments from the game, gameplay wise, were in this second half, and that really did save the game for me. The forest chase scene where we first meet Yara and Lev was one of the most intense moments in the whole game. It was so well done and I loved every single part about it. That whole nest tower section was one of my favourite moments too. The whole part where you sort of fall from the crane into the pool and then you have to get your way down to the building through an absolute minefield of the infected. all in close quarters with areas that you can fall off. That whole sequence was amazing. The Ground Zero sequence where you're in the hospital and it's incredibly eerie and intense before you finally meet the big Rat King, aka the Bloater Stalker 3000, that sequence had me shitting bricks the entire time and I absolutely loved it. Story aside, the second half of the game was as good, if not better than the first half in my opinion. Literally the only thing that I disliked was the pacing of the Abby section and the fact that I just didn't really care for her. Now, lastly it came to the ending where she lets Allie and Dina go and they look like they're gonna live happily ever after before Allie goes and decides she wants to kill Abby again. People were confused by this. They said, why would she do that? She has the life she wanted. Dina told her not to go and all that kind of stuff, but very clearly Allie has some very serious PTSD. And that is the tragedy of this game. Dina said don't do it and she did it anyway. People complained that she made a dumb decision, but that is literally the point of the story. She made a tragic decision in a tragic world and it cost her absolutely everything. If this wasn't set up in the first game when Joel literally ruined the entire population of the world to save her, then I don't know what game you were playing. The end for me felt very hollow and sad, but it was definitely meant to feel that way, so I'm not going to judge the ending too much since 1, it is hard to judge an ending when there's the possibility of a sequel, and 2, like I said, it was kind of meant to make you feel that way. If this was the final installment, I would have loved to have the choice between letting Abby live or drowning her, as that was just the perfect moment for you to have multiple endings like Red Dead 2 for example, but I get that if there is a third one on the way then you kind of have to have a set ending. So I'm going to guess there will be a third game down the line at some point. Overall, despite my issues with the game, I absolutely loved it to pieces, and although I personally don't rate it as highly as the first game, I am going to give it an overall score of 8.7 out of 10, with the gameplay being a solid 9.5 and the story side of it being an 8, which obviously balances out to 8.7. I know a lot of the video was talking about my issues, so an 8.7 might seem overly high considering that, but honestly, outside of my issues with that second act, I barely have any issues at all. And even that issue just isn't game breaking for me. It pretty much just lowered the score from honestly maybe a 9.5 if the story was amazing to an 8.7, so it clearly wasn't that big of a deal despite how much I ranted about it. Let me know your own thoughts on the game down in the comments section. I'm definitely very keen to talk about the game now that I'm done, and as we speak I am actually doing the New Game Plus as well, so I'm definitely keen to hear everyone else's thoughts as I play along. That is going to do it for this one though guys. If you enjoyed the video then be sure to leave a like down below, and if you are new then consider subscribing to the channel with those notifications on. Thank you all very much for tuning in and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.